idealism prevails. Make the world a better place.
Let me introduce my panelists for you today. First and foremost, let me begin with the terrific and talented longtime writer and podcast host, Ana Marie Cox. Next up is a former Trump supporter turned Trump antagonist. He's very active on social media. If you're on Twitter, you definitely see his tweets all the time. And he's a New York Mets fan. David Weissman. Our next gentleman, if you watch MSNBC and shows like AM Joy, you've definitely seen this guy on. He is one of the most ardent personalities I think you'll ever see on TV, Elie Mystal. And rounding us out, probably the smartest guy on the panel, probably the one who's written the most books at least, Dr. Jonathan Metzl. All right, so I'm sure all of you guys who are here at Politicon have some idea who most of us are, because otherwise why would y'all be here? So what I want to start with is that the title of this panel is Cult of Trump. And I'm curious, Ana Marie, what does that mean to you?
Oh, I take it very literally. I actually had the good fortune to interview a gentleman who's researched cults for years and years. His name is Robert J. Lifton. Highly recommend his doorstop of a book about the Chinese Cultural Revolution. But he said he now writes about Trump. And he literally studies why people do awful things. Like, that's sort of his area of interest. He's also interviewed Nazi doctors.
Sure. Nazi doctors are people too.
There's a through line here. But actually, one of the things that he said about Trump is that people who are ardent supporters, and I do think we should draw a distinction between people who voted for him,
sure,
and people who are still ardent supporters through all of the things that we have seen happen, have some of the same characteristics of people who join cults, and that they are, and this is maybe something Jonathan can speak to, they are soothing a pain. They are addressing something that's missing inside of them, and they're looking to this guru to help.
Doctor, is Donald Trump our Sherpa?
I'm of two minds about this particular issue. On there. I'm of two minds about this issue, right? I just had a book come out called Wage of Whiteness, where I spent about 5 years doing focus groups across the South, talking to people really about why they supported policies that ended up being very bad for them. And so I looked at Trump-era policies about healthcare, about guns, about education. And what I found in my research was that on one hand, across the board, particularly for working class white people, the policies that Trump was advocating, undermining the Affordable Care Act, huge tax cuts for corporations that cut schools in people's own neighborhoods, across the board, those policies were negatively impacting the people in those communities and actually shortening their lifespans. And every time that would happen, there would be, a news story that would be like, farmers are getting screwed over, people are getting screwed over, are the Trump supporters going to kind of wake up? And in the book, basically, what I say is they're not going to wake up because there are many deeper ideologies about race, about social class, but really about the hierarchy that people play into. So I think to understand why people aren't going to wake up, you really need to talk about the deeper ideologies that are at play that are behind that support.
Right. Who here on this stage supported Donald Trump? Raise your hand. Aha! Okay. I'm glad there's one of us up here. Let me ask you, and we'll get to your change and evolution on that as this conversation expands, but I'm curious, in the beginning, what drew you to Donald Trump?
Well, what drew me to Donald Trump was he was like the manifestation of what was angered a lot of conservatives from 10 years past. A lot of the conservative media has built this propaganda machine that installs fear, anger, hate, and a lot of it is out of ignorance, really, because we were led to believe what Democrats were. We were led to believe that they wanted to take our rights away. We thought that they were going to take our guns away. All of these bits, we were led to believe that, and Trump was like the antidote. Because we took people like Sean Hannity's word for it. A lot of other conservative pundits word for it. That he was a successful business guy. I mean, and he knew how to tell how it is, and you know, you trust these people to help you make the right decision for our country without really properly vetting him. And that's what led me to vote for him in the general election, because they really are good at demonizing Democrats like Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. So it was an easy choice, you know, you had Trump or Hillary Clinton. And so once you really make that decision to go into that, you really get that trance of Trump to the wrong.
Right. Elie, I'm curious, when Trump first arrived on the scene, that fateful day when he came down that escalator on Trump Tower, where we are at right now, is this what you thought would happen?
Yes, although as a black person, I would say first arrived was around the birtherism, right? Like Trump didn't just show up to call Mexicans rapists and criminals. Trump showed up to tell the entire country that the first black president was illegitimate. Trump showed up to tell the entire country that Central Park 5 should be executed. Like, as a New Yorker, I have been aware of this idiot for a very long time, and 2015 was not the first time that I saw it, right? At the point where he was actually running for president, you know, of course this is what you anticipated. I guess what I didn't, and I anticipated him, and he would do everything that he's done if given a chance to do it. What I didn't anticipate necessarily, certainly when he first started running, was that he would be given the chance. And so when I think about the cult of Trump, I think about the entire cultural moment that we are in. Not just the actual Trump supporters, as Ana Marie Cox points out correctly, the ardent Trump supporters versus the I just voted for Trump supporters. My cult of Trump includes the media, which he has hacked. It includes the entire kind of institutional normalization of his bigotry and misogyny. Like there are a lot of things going on in our society that Trump is not the cause of, but the symptom of. He's the result of a sickness in our society, and that's what I think about when I think about the whole cult.
Yeah, I was going to say that just from the reading I've done about, again, cults, they don't come into being unless like the cultural moment is ready for them. Like the guru only exists when the space is created for the guru, right? Like, and we created that space for the guru, and I'll include myself as a member of the media. I, like a lot of people, was so sure that he wouldn't win, was willing to cover him as a lark, as a sideshow. And then I feel fortunate that it happened for me pretty quickly, that what came to be very, very clear was that it was a kind of joke. His campaign was a joke in the sense that it was like 3 people, and you know, one of them was an intern, and 2 of them were Hope Hicks. I mean, you know, it was, you know, he had this like ragtag band of people that had no business running a presidential campaign. Their events were incredibly poorly organized. The people that they weren't capturing emails. They weren't doing all these things that like a normal presidential campaign would do. But my colleagues in the media were writing about it as if it was a normal campaign.
Right.
Like as though it had all of the trappings of a normal campaign, and they were treating his pronouncements as though they were pronouncements of a normal candidate. When really the shit
We can curse, it's Politicon.
The stuff he was saying was crazy pants. Just bananas. You know, like build a wall and have Mexico pay for it. If someone said that shouting on a street corner, you would walk the other direction, right? And what other, you know, all of the stuff that he said, including grab them by the pussy, is stuff that you would immediately be dismissed from polite society. And we just kept treating him as though this was something you could say and still be a presidential candidate. And that's what's created the situation we're in now.
I just think it's important, and I think all of this supports the idea that this moment taps into something much deeper, something that's been building for quite some time, which is a moment of, you know, fear of outsiders, structural racism, all of these factors. I remember I was doing focus groups about, you know, the rejection of the Affordable Care Act around the time that Trump announced his presidency, and I kept telling people, his policies are going to kill you. And they said, well, I'm still voting for him. I'm still voting for him. And it wasn't because of policies. Everybody else was talking about policies. And he was talking about this fall from grace, this idea that white America was great in a particular way, it's fallen down, and I'm going to restore the greatness of white America. And it didn't matter what the policy was, but the fact that basically he was saying, I'm going to restore this privilege that honestly people probably didn't have in a factual way, but it tapped into this myth, this ethos. And so in a way it almost became an unfair debate, because one side was arguing policy and the other side was arguing victimhood, nostalgia, all these kind of factors that really drove, I think, a lot of these early moments. And in a way it was a debate about two incommensurate kind of things. One was the aura, the social media, the kind of structural racism of this country, and the other was about, here are some policy positions that are going to make your life better.
And I think that's borne out, as we've seen, that even now, after everything that we have seen, Donald Trump still has an absurdly high approval rating amongst the Republican Party, that they have been indoctrinated into this cult and have never extricated themselves from it. But here we have David, who did do exactly that. He was a Trump supporter, and along the way decided that wasn't going to be his jam. So I'm curious, what was it that started provoking your thought about maybe changing your mind about Trump, and what was that tipping point?
Well, what happened was, we are a Trump supporter. One of your goals was basically to own the libs, going after celebrities, trying to get people to support Trump. Many Americans or Trump supporters think that America is only one way of life, that, and as I mentioned before, they fear Democrats because of the media. And on Twitter, there was a moment where conservatives were thinking that they were being shadow banned. So I go after a couple of celebrities saying, hey, Twitter, why do you let these celebrities, wear Nazi outfits, in comedy, and you're silencing conservatives? One of the celebrities happened to be Sarah Silverman. She responded in a very kind manner, which was not normally a typical response, towards a Trump supporter. Because when you go after a celebrity, remember Hollywood, you see them as the bad guys that want to take your rights away. So I was caught off guard by her kindness. She explained to me what comedy was. Then I was realizing, okay, she is going to talk to me about, this, why doesn't she like Trump? I'm Jewish, and I was originally, 100% pro-Israel and all that. So I was thinking, Trump support Israel, so why doesn't she, a fellow Jew like it, Trump? So we got in a civil debate, and she didn't try to convert me at all. She showed me the proper respect and just talk. And after our discussion, I was really surprised with that. And then I started asking her about what the liberals believe. Why do liberals want to take our guns away? Why do liberals care more about illegal aliens over veterans? Different questions that we're taught, from conservative pundits on what, we thought Democrats are. And while that was going on, other Trump supporters were seeing me having this peaceful dialogue, and they started questioning my motives, saying, hey, this guy is, being a sellout, he's a fem plant, or, traitor, different things, and I was really shocked because I worked with a lot of them for many years, as a conservative activist, writer. I knew many of them, they got to know me personally, so that when this was going on, this kind of snapped me out of that, Trump into the wrong trance. And then when that happened, I saw how Trump does it with Democrats as well, and it's almost like they thrive as talking to each other. And I realized this is, decided to tear our country apart, to a further divide. And so I started slowly questioning, Trump. And at the same time, I was doing this, like I said, I was learning about liberal values. And it was sort of like two different journeys in one, happened at the same time. And then I realized that conservative pundits were wrong about liberal values. They were wrong about, Clinton, Obama.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, okay, if they were wrong about these people, are they wrong about Trump? And so I decided to go back, because like I said, I took Trump, Hannity's word, like he would never really be wrong, and then realized that he did it. And I went back and saw, wow, Trump dodged the track 5 times.
Yeah.
And he was, and so that's because he thought he was a patriot.
So I want to pick up on something that David keeps saying because I think it's important. A lot of times when we have these discussions about the Trump voter, we're kind of focused on the voter who has been conned, essentially, into voting for Trump. But David kept saying something I think is important. We were taught. Well, who's doing the teaching? And it's like the superstructure of the Republican Party almost always gets off the hook in these discussions. All of these never-Trumpers you see now used to be Republicans, and they supported the kind of ridiculously bad policies, bad messaging, racist messaging, sexist messaging that created the opportunity for Trump to exist in the first place. So I'm super happy that Max Boot is now on the right side of history, right? But it's Max Boot's fault that Merrick Garland is on the Supreme Court, right? All of this training, all of this indoctrination that David is talking about, that did not start with Trump. That started with Bush. That started with Reagan. That started with George Will. That started with Mitch McConnell. All of these people share in the shame and should share in the derision of what has happened to this country because they have been pushing these lies for a generation.
You can, it goes back to the Southern strategy, really.
You go back to Nixon.
It goes back to slavery. In some ways, structural racism and structural inequality and structural class inequality as well. The way that Trump talks about money and class and the aspirational nature of his wealth. But I also wanted to point out something else that the right did, I would say more than Republicans, to set this up, which is that they outsourced their messaging to a cadre of pundits and PACs that work together. There was a seamless, Kurt, you could probably speak to this, there was a seamless relationship between the Republican Party, the official Republican Party, and a whole bunch of pundits and a whole bunch of media outlets and a whole bunch of various grassroots organizations.
Think tanks, the Heritage Foundation, Miller Society.
And people think that the liberals run the media. I wish, right?
I can tell you, you're right about that. I was able to see firsthand. Full disclosure, I was a Republican. I've since become a Democrat. But there was a tremendous amount of coordination and strategy between the official apparatus of the Republican Party, whether it's members of Congress, the congressional committees. I worked at the Oversight Committee during the Obama years, and there was a circular flow of information between what we were doing, the political apparatus, the donors, the commentators, the conservative media, and I wish as a Democrat now, especially in this backdrop of impeachment, that they had that too. Because let me tell you, so oftentimes, and what I didn't know about being a Democrat, it is maddening at times to watch how we operate. And I spend more of my time banging my head against the wall than I'd care to admit. Doctor, maybe you can help me with that here.
Don't. If you're going to bang your head, bang the front and not the side. First of all, but I would say there's something to that. Look at who's spending more money on Facebook right now. Which party is spending more money on all these kind of things? So I do think that there's something about the flow of information and the kind of messaging. But I do think I want to add one caveat though, which is after 5 years of doing this research, two things have done to me. One is I do think there's a danger in saying that all Trump voters are the same. All Trump voters are, are this one monolithic thing, and they're being duped. I met a number of people who they just basically said, "I'm playing the long game of politics. I don't like what Trump represents, but what I care about is illegal abortion. I care about the judiciary. I care about all these things." And so they felt like, number one, Trump was delivering on these promises, and that I was not seeing that. They're like, "Who's the dummy here? We control the White House, the Senate, all these things." So number one is, I think there's a danger of saying that people are conned, which is that you oversimplify the long game that some supporters have. And the other is, I don't know, it was interesting for me doing my research, and I would always ask people at the end of the interview, is there any instance in which you could see yourself voting for somebody other than Trump? 90% of people gave me the same answer, actually. And it wasn't about policy, it wasn't about healthcare or schools. 9 out of 10 people said, if you find somebody tougher than Trump, one guy said, if you find somebody mean and nasty enough to give Trump a nickname that sticks, I'll vote for that person. So there is also something about like the strongman fascistic moment that we're living in, where Trump plays into this historical moment. So it's not about, you're shaking your head, but believe me, doing the research, I was like, oh man, who's, I kept thinking, is Bernie tougher than Trump? Like, did they give him a nickname?
Ellie, then Anna, then David.
Yeah, that makes me want to cry. That's terrible.
No, we're up here. It's a group hug on everybody.
But it's. I don't even know how to talk about that. I mean, it's just so sad, right? But like, I think the other when we talk about the organizational messaging that Republicans have, we can't talk about that. And I kind of agree with your point that you can't treat Trump voters as a monolith, but you can treat them as generally homogeneous. Right? We're generally talking about white people when we're talking about Trump voters. Democrats have a heterogeneous party, and that is part of the reason why we can't have that coordination. We see it even in our presidential primary process right now. We've got like some Democrats seem to understand that the base of the party is black and brown. And other Democrats don't seem to understand that in any frickin' way, right? So like even within one of the reasons why the Democrats always feel like they're kind of playing from behind or playing catch up or lacking ideological stridentness is because we've got so many different tents in our party, right? Like one of my favorite quotes about being black in America is that, black people have no permanent friends and no permanent enemies, we just have permanent interests, right? And those interests survive any particular candidate because there's crap we need done, like the cops, the shootings, we have things that need to happen for our communities that kind of transcend some of the internecine political points. We have, Latinos in our party that have their permanent interests. We have Jewish Americans in our party that have their permanent interests. We have women in our party, white women and black women and all these people have different things that they want to get out of the system. When you look at the Republicans, their overall homogeneity means that they basically, the Republican Party is bifurcated into two wings, right? You have the rich Republicans who want the smash and grab capitalism, right? And then you have the poor Republicans who, these are the people that I say are being conned because these are the people who are never going to benefit from the economic policies of the rich Republicans.
Yeah, it is interesting. I can say, as a former Republican, shockingly, my social circle never sat around and talked about social injustice or climate change or gun reform or a lot of the issues that now that I am in Democrat circles I hear about on a daily basis. And so that there's such a different cultural shift. I think part of that is because Republicans tend to be generally of one race and have a very different set of priorities. David, you real quick, you said you wanted to say something, then let's get to Anna.
I know when you said, there are different levels of Trump supporters, that some are con, some are not. I think the big problem is, no matter what level of Trump supporters they were con as Republicans because they have this thing that, that when I said before, that Democrats want to take their rights away. But the truth is, just because Democrats want to fight for rights of others doesn't mean they're taking rights away of them. And there's this miscommunication of that. And that's why people are voting for Trump, regardless of what he does, because they fear that Democrats are going to take their rights away, when that's not the case.
God, so many things to react to. First of all, I want to say to Elie, right? That it's a really astute observation about obviously the Republicans are of this monolithic kind of demographic, and the Democrats and liberals in general are not. And what's more is progressives value that diversity, and which is a problem. If you want to have everybody marching in lockstep, you can't have one of your main values be we all like to be different from each other. So there's that. And then the other thing, it's so interesting to use the word con in relation to Trump. I think you're right that it's not necessarily the right way to frame it, because they're not getting conned. They're getting what they want. I think even the people that are having their health care taken away are getting what they want,
right? Which
is just something more important to them than health care, which seems crazy, but it's rational. And that's, I think, something really important that I also can bring from this literal cult research I've done, which is that these are not crazy people who are unlike you and I, that fall under the spell of some mystical person. They are people making what seems in the moment like a rational choice based on the values that they have.
Right, no, I push back.
I do want to say one more thing.
Oh, please.
This is not to say that people who don't fall in with Trump get screwed, because they do. And I actually think that evangelicals will find eventually they get screwed as well. Like, no matter how many judges...
Only if there's a hell.
Well, that would be I was going to say, that would be the ultimate getting screwed. I mean, like, I think that,
And the hell from the South Park movie. But no, I mean, so in a way, I agree with all of those things, right? In other words, like, I just wrote a book that quantifies how badly people are getting screwed. It actually costs people on the aggregate about 3 to 5 weeks of their lifespan, GOP policies, particularly working class white Americans. And so that was all this data that I added up, showed that people were getting screwed. But the other thing about it was, and this goes back to the Du Boisian notion of the Wage of Whiteness written after Reconstruction, that there was something more powerful that went into the ideology than this idea of 3 to 5 weeks of lifespan. It was about this hierarchy of racial being. And so, I mean, another shocking thing that I found was when I talked to people about the Affordable Care Act in the South, people who were medically ill and rejecting the Affordable Care Act, they were more knowledgeable about what they were rejecting, even when they needed medical treatment, than my friends in New York who are on the Affordable Care Act. So it's not like people didn't know. There's still if we just educate people about healthcare reform. So it's really, how do you tap into these ideologies? And then also, I just think that how do you unify this message in a way that becomes, I mean, say nothing else. If you talk to a lot of conservative Republicans, they understand the importance of that voting bloc. They understand how to win elections in a way. And so in a way, what's our strategy for winning elections, given that the important diversity of opinions?
And as someone, I actually often don't even call myself a Democrat anymore, and that speaks to the problem, right? Because it's just like, I don't even know anymore. Like, it's not that I'm anything but wildly liberal. But, well, sure, yeah. I mean, I think that taking some bold stands for some bold ideas is one way to win an election. But I was going to say the joke that occurred to me when we were talking about the coordination that Republicans have versus Democrats is the only thing Democrats know how to organize is a circular firing squad. A joke I've heard a long time ago. And it's true, though. Like, I mean, even looking at the primaries right now, like this consternation supposedly that the mucky mucks have about getting someone who's electable, everyone's pretty popular. Like people who are not going to vote for Trump don't give a shit who they vote for, to be honest. Like, I will vote for anyone. Like, I have a preference for sure, Elizabeth Warren, but I will vote for Joe Biden. I will vote for Mayor Pete. I will vote for one of the other people that doesn't understand that you need to have a black and brown coalition.
I will vote for the xenomorph from Aliens. Acid breath. Like, I think that would be, at least, I don't think they would be as bad on judges.
As long as it was born in America, I mean, you got the, not in Kenya.
One of the things that we're talking about is the psychic benefit of whiteness, right? And the scholarship that basically redounds that kind of the lowest white man can feel better than the highest black man if we live in a structure of racism. And to pick up on one of David's points about trolling the libs, like the excitement that random white people get on Twitter from tweeting at me that I was an affirmative action admit to Harvard twice is beyond me, right? Like, I'm a relatively well-spoken, relatively educated man, and these rando white people on Twitter are like, well, you just got in because it's from convention, and like they feel good about themselves, which is weird to me because they shouldn't. That like that is what racism gives people, and the reason why Trump to me has been such an obvious and linear reaction to Obama is that Obama took that from white people. Like Obama just daily took from racist white people the belief that they were better than the highest black man, because the highest black man is up there talking to angels every day in their face, and that's why Trump is so the counter-reaction, and I think that we lose that sense sometimes, so the counter-reaction to what Obama represented. Not even what Obama did. I mean, most people like healthcare. I mean, It's not even about Obama's policies. It was what Obama represented. This class and eloquence that you couldn't deny existed. Well then, screw it. We're gonna find the exact opposite, the crass lowness, criminality of Donald Trump, and push that on you to reestablish the order, which is that, again, the lowest white man is higher than the highest black man.
You know, if you look at them, I mean, I agree with that 1,000,000%. And just to build on that comment, I mean, if you look at Du Bois's notion of a wage of whiteness, which makes this exact same point, his idea is like basically, why are white people doing this? In other words, the argument is he's writing about the period after the Civil War, and he's like, why don't newly freed slaves and working class whites get together? Because boy, what a great coalition they would make to extract, privileges from the elites. And so his whole idea is, if everybody got together, they would be able to extract better working conditions, better wages, better, own land. And the whole idea is, this idea of a wage of whiteness is what capitalism gives poor white people to keep them from aligning with black people, because if they did that, that would form an alliance that would be way more powerful than the elites could suppress. And I just have used that frame so many times because I think of all these points where it's like, gosh, if you're a Trump supporter, why don't you say, yeah, I'm a Trump supporter, but in order for my support, I want healthcare, I want better roads, I want education, I want all these kind of things. In other words, if people started demanding these kind of things, it would force them into alliance, a conservative progressivism, and all this rhetoric keeps people apart in these very racialized ways.
Well, part of the problem is that conservatives believe that there's only one American culture. And in my transition to a Democrat, I have spoken with so many people since my dialogue, and I learned that is not true. I learned that a black person has a totally different life than a white person. A black person has to worry about, being killed just for calling the cops. You don't see that as a white person. And different things like that. I have learned that.
You gotta learn sometime. This is better late than never.
Let me be very clear. I think it is fantastic and healthy that no matter where you are at in your life story, that you can have these kind of awakenings and self-realizations and challenge yourself to learn about the other side and challenge yourself to get new information and to make that decision. I think that we need more of that in this country. And so hearing you gives me hope for future generations.
Make sure you reproduce.
I want to ask you a question about that, because I'm always interested in kind of the path before the tipping point, like what are the things that happened in your life that made it even possible for you to be able to consider these things that were new ideas to you?
Well, when I had a dialogue, there was no pressure on changing my beliefs. It was just, kindness. I was accepted as a Trump supporter at the time. There was no pressure. And when I just felt encouraged, and I just wanted to learn more. And then Sarah made a tweet that, hey, let's be Twitter friends, realizing, sometimes our wants and desires and needs are actually almost the same. And that's when I was appreciated just for dialoguing. That's what lowered my overall pain and my overall closed-mindedness to want to learn more.
I think it's so interesting, the thing that you said that I hear a lot from people when I talk to them about how they wind up changing their minds for whatever reason, whatever it is they've changed their minds about. It is this idea that you have to approach someone without trying to convince them. There's a real catch-22 there, right? Like you can't, if you want to try and get someone to change their mind, you have to go into the conversation having given up the expectation that you're going to be able to change your mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but if I can just push back a little bit, and I think that's great. Your story is excellent, and I applaud you. But at some level, that needs to happen on not my time, right?
Oh, your particular time especially. This needs to be a white person to a white person thing. Very, very much so. Right, I think that we've asked black and brown people to the emotional labor of white people for hundreds of years. You should be able to take some time off. This has been rough.
The white tears are not something that I have any a whole lot more kind of patience for. Yeah, no, and look, it's the way that one of the analogies I make, like my wife works as corporate lawyer, but like her pro bono stuff is, helping criminals' rights, right? So she goes into Rikers Island and make her take off her bra, and like she meets with these people and writes their appeals, and and I'm like, I don't have, like, I agree with her with the fight, I don't have the stomach for it, right? She was so happy one day, she's like, oh, we totally think this guy might actually be innocent of the crime of murder that he was convicted for. I mean, he definitely hit his boyfriend over the head with a porcelain toilet bowl, but that's not what killed him. I'm like, yeah, no, like rights, Sixth Amendment, yay, but like I cannot go to Rikers and help that man. I'm glad somebody can. And that's kind of how I feel about like would-be converted Trump voters. Like if somebody has the time to play the Sarah McLachlan music and like go and listen and talk, and like, oh my God, I'm so sorry about her, like more power to you, and that's great, but like I do not have time for that anymore. Because I have 2 children and they need to not get shot. Right? Like I have things that I need to do and see this world be before I leave, and I need this world to be in a certain kind of sustainable way for my kids. I don't have time to like teach remedial humanity to people who have abandoned it to vote for Trump.
I think that the thing is, so I actually interviewed this guy, Derek Black. Does anyone know who he is? He's a former white nationalist who's now a total social justice warrior.
Yeah, he's around, yeah.
Yeah, Elie Mystal wrote about him in the Washington Post, which I think won a Pulitzer. And he wrote a wonderful book about it too called Rising Out of Hatred. And Derek's story is really interesting because he was literally born into white nationalist, if you want to call it royalty or the opposite of royalty. He was like, David Duke was his godfather, his dad started Stormfront. He was in it. And his story, I will vastly abbreviate it, is that he wound up going away to college after being homeschooled for years and years. And while he was undercover for a while, eventually people found out his history. And you should read the book or read the magazine article. But when I talked to him about it, there were 2 reactions on the campus. One was that there were people who were like, I want to talk to you about your beliefs, right? Like there were some Jewish students that had him over for dinner. And they didn't talk about politics, actually, they just sort of talked, right? And there were also students who protested him, who boycotted classes, who told him to his face that he had, hurt them and that, his ideas were violent and oppressive. And when I asked him, okay, so which was the thing that did it, he said both. He said that he needed to know how much he hurt people. That if it hadn't been made clear, that it had just been the open hand, it had just been the dialogue, that probably would have gotten him somewhere, maybe. But he also needed to see that there were real people on the other side of the policies that he endorsed, and that those people were in pain.
Doctor.
I was kind of smiling because I like how we're describing moving off of supporting Trump as transitioning. I think I'm going to steal that curve. But I would say, we have this interesting experience here. I totally agree that this is there's a bigger debate here about what kind of world and country we want to live in, a moral question, which I think is hugely important. That's what's at stake in this election. And then there's the other question, which is, how do we form the coalition that's going to win? Do we need Trump supporters? Do we need working class white people? Or do we just need people who support Biden and now to vote for Bernie, or vice versa, or something like that? So I do think there's a question of how can we win elections that get to that. And my concern about this is that, I don't know if any people have watched that Cambridge Analytica terrifying Netflix documentary, but part of what was powerful about this Cambridge Analytica approach was they weren't trying to get people to vote for some other candidate. They were trying to get people to feel like, just give up, the system's not going to work for you, or something like that. And so I do think that, I just want to say, I think let's just take Trump voters at face value. They're voting based on some ideology or something like that. How can you mobilize something? How can you mobilize enough of a coalition to defeat that? And I do think that is incumbent on not just going against Trump, but Democrats defining what they're for in a way that will bring people together.
David, you look like you want to say something.
Yes, I actually campaigned for Trump when I lived in Israel to Americans that in Israel. And one thing I learned when I became a Democrat here is that we have such a divide. I know there's still animosity between Bernie and Hillary supporters, and the best way that we can beat Trump is to get behind a democratic principle, get behind one message. I mean, I know it's impossible, but I think that's the only way to beat Trump.
I will say that having a parade of 12 people debates is kind of insane at this point. But
the giving up is strong in people. I mean, like the few black Trump voters I know, there's only one that I still talk to, text with. I don't see him anymore. And we grew up in the same neighborhood. I was in my neighborhood, the rich one. I had opportunities out the ass that he didn't have. He was always more kind of radical, you would say, militant, you would say, than I was growing up. He's the one that ended up voting for Trump, and as it was becoming clear that was what he was going to do, I was like, what the hell is wrong with you? And he was like, man, Elie, you know that white people are racist anyway. I'm always going to get mine. And that was like, shit, this man's going to win. Like, that was the first time that I had this moment of like, oh, right? And it's part of that thing is that, for the 12% of black people that are going to vote for this idiot again, one of the motivating factors is that feeling that this world, this country is so ridiculously racist that choosing between racists is hopeless, right? Like, and I disagree and I make all the arguments, but that feeling of hopelessness that they had about ever advancing the ball on racial and social justice issues led to a feeling of selfishness, since we're never going to advance the ball on these issues, I might as well get the tax cuts that I have coming.
I want to go to I think something that Jonathan pointed out, and now I can't remember exactly what it was, but it has to do with the fact that, the Cambridge Analytica, about how they were just trying to discourage voting. They were doing negative voting. And I'll say, so the moment that I realized Trump was going to win is I was talking to an African-American voter at some point, and I should say an African-American person, because I was asking about the appeal of Hillary's campaign, and she said something, so you're telling me if I vote for Trump, a racist is going to be in the White House? Like, wow, wouldn't that be wild? Wouldn't that be something that I'd have to worry about, Yeah, you can't make an argument that, don't vote for that guy, because then it'll be bad for black people, because, it's pretty bad.
That's what Democrats have to do. And again, like, there are Democrats who think that this election is going to be fought over the ground of the former Trump voter, or the Obama the Trump voter. No, this election is going to be fought on motivating those black people who voted for Obama and then stayed home. It's going to be fought on the grounds of motivating them, motivating the Latinos who voted for Obama and then stayed home. And you're not going to motivate them unless you can give them a vision of a world that is better. It is not enough for Latinos to say, we're going to stop kidnapping your children. Yeah, duh, of course. What do you have? What's next? Like, what are you going to do to make my life better? Don't tell me how you simply won't make my life worse, as bad as the other guy will. I kind of baked that into the system. What are you going to do to actually positively improve my situation, the situation of my community? And there are Democrats who are willing to talk about that, and there are Democrats who are not. And it's really obvious who's who. And like that's my fear for how do we, I don't see how we build the coalition if we are trying to build the coalition in spite of black voters as opposed to because of black voters.
It's the question, do you think that the people you need to turn out to win Wisconsin in 2020 are between Madison and Milwaukee, or are they in Madison and Milwaukee?
Jonathan, then we're going to take questions.
I'd like to know actually more about this point, because I'm really honestly genuinely torn about this point. In other words, like, if you look at the opinion polls about black voters, for example, as a group, which again, diversity in all voting blocks, black voters tend to be incrementalists. They basically tend to say, well, Medicaid expansion didn't give me everything, but it sure gave me this benefit. So why are you going to throw it all out the window for Medicare for all, for example? And I think there's lots of examples of, this program. I never expected anybody to solve racism at all, but this program gave me this and that and things like that. And so I do wonder, who are the Democrats that are speaking to that demographic, considering that there are positions that for me are on the Democratic side also not taking account of the fact of the ways people think, well, this program, we fought and died, and that goes all the way back to voting rights, things like that, but people fought and died to get, maybe not here, but here. And so to say something like, which I probably support in an ideal world, something like Medicare for All, well, I've done a lot of groups, and we've done through the summer I run, where people say, well, does that mean I have to give up the Medicaid expansion that I really fought for and things like that? So what is that group?
What we see is that black voters are very pragmatic,
exactly.
Right? And for good reason. When white people screw up, we pay the price. So we have good reason to be pragmatic. But I think one of the things that the numbers miss is that they're focused on black voters. Black voters tend to be more centrist than black non-voters. I'm talking about black non-voters, right? And we don't have great polling on what black non-voters, what they want to motivate them to come out to vote. But what little kind of research and scholarship there is, that I've seen at least, suggests that kind of proactive anti-racism campaigns will actually motivate black non-voters to vote that one time, right? We see this less in the presidential elections, but more on the local level. But we see on the local level that you can, where most people don't vote at all, right? You can get more black voters to vote for your kind of congressional campaign or your mayoral insurgency if you are promoting anti-racist policies. It basically just explains Bill de Blasio, right? Bill de Blasio should not be mayor of any place, right? He doesn't have talents of a mayor, right? But he was able to effectively attack Christine Quinn when he was primarying her, who was basically a Bloomberg clone, or at least thought of as a Bloomberg clone, on kind of very hard anti-racist policies.
And can I just say one thing, because as somebody who writes about whiteness...
Real quick, we gotta get to the audience, or they might,
I also think that that's a winning argument for white audiences. In other words, Trump has co-opted the narrative of whiteness in this country, but there are many ways to be white. And so, asking white voters, is this the model of whiteness to you? Call on the better angels of whiteness. Also, I'm just saying, I think that in a way, anti-racist kind of politics is not just about bringing minority voters to the polls. It's actually bringing white voters to the polls.
I completely agree, but I laugh because now, having spent a couple of years thinking I was going to do a podcast that was about getting Trump voters and liberals to talk, I'm now doing a podcast about getting people, basically people to talk about white supremacy and see their part in it. A lot harder to talk about. It's easy to find kind of let's have a dialogue kind of conversations where it's a Trump supporter, and you can find that. It is hard to get white people to be interested in and definitely to be a part of. Do you want to talk about how you benefit from white supremacy? Not an exciting thing.
All right, they're storming the mic now, so come on. Please, thank you. They're not listening to me, so tell me your name, where you're from, and what's your question?
Okay, I'm Gail Hatkop. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. And I am of the belief that we live in a dissociated society. And I think a lot of that has to do with reality TV, and then that's been reinforced by gaslighting, and also people being isolated, and people who their only news source is Fox. And the question is, how will we combat that? Because that's still at play. The Republicans are pouring their money into Facebook, and that could be manipulated horribly. Now, Cambridge Analytica is gone, but there are others. And we still have a lot of the same things that we faced in 2016. So, what will wake people up out of the trance?
All right, Anna, why don't you take that one, and then we'll go.
Oh, I know. Hold on, just a second. No, I don't. I would be excited for anyone that had answers. If I had an answer, I'd be going to the Democratic Party in a heartbeat and just not even charging. I can say again, I hate to keep going back. I have done all this actual cult research, and the thing that happened in China for people to become disillusioned with the Cultural Revolution there was that the daily experience of their lives, the difference between that and what the party leadership was saying became intolerable. That they experienced such pain and, loss, literally like people dying, starving, whatever, and they had the Communist Party telling them everything's great, we're producing more food than ever before, that just made people started they couldn't believe it anymore. I don't know if anyone else.
Real quick,
Right now we're 13 narratives, 13 people on stage. What's the power of one narrative? In other words, I think it's a hard question right now because there are very different ideologies. So I think it's an open question. Either we're going to get counter-hacked by Finland, who will counteract the hacking of Russia. We need to counter. But I do think the open question is, how much can the Democrats turn the 13 narratives we have now into one coherent narrative, and what's the power of that?
Right.
Idealism prevails. Make the world a better place.